Hi, my name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what my family did to me. On Christmas night, my older brother whispered something to my father, and just like that, I was thrown out. No jacket, no suitcase, just a torn coat and $1 in my pocket. Because I wouldn't give him $2,000. He called me bad luck, shoved me out the door like garbage, and when my mother tried to stop him, he slapped her. While my brother laughed, I walked into the freezing dark, found shelter in a rotting cabin nobody wanted. But what happened after that night? It made them kneel and beg. Now, would you still call me the disgrace of the family? Christmas Eve had always carried a certain weight in my family. Not warmth, not joy, just expectation. The kind that sits in your chest before you even take your coat off. I parked along the curb and sat there a moment longer than necessary, watching the lights through the living room window. The tree was up, tall and decorated, but it looked staged, like it had been dressed for a photo, not for people who actually wanted to be together. I could already picture where everyone would be. My brother on the couch, my father in his chair, my mother moving quietly between the kitchen and the table, pretending the air wasn't tense. I stepped inside, and the smell of reheated food hit me first. Not fresh, not festive, just practical. My father glanced up briefly, then back to the television. No greeting. My brother smiled without warmth, the kind that meant he was already entertained. "You're late," my father said, calm and flat. "I came straight from work," I replied. Traffic was heavy. That was true. I hadn't stopped anywhere. I hadn't bought gifts. I hadn't had time. My jacket still carried the cold from outside. I kept it on longer than I needed to. My mother nodded at me from the kitchen. Her eyes said more than her mouth ever did. "Be careful." We sat. Plates were passed. The television murmured in the background, but no one watched it. My brother talked about his plans for the new year, his voice easy, confident. He never measured his words. He never had to. I chose mine carefully. I always had. "I'll eat later," I said when the plate came to me. Not too hungry. My father leaned back slightly, hands folded. He waited. He was good at that, letting silence do the work. Then he said it casually, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "So, we need some help." I looked up. "What kind of help?" He didn't answer right away. He glanced at my brother, then back at me. $2,000. The number landed heavier than it should have, not because I hadn't heard it correctly, because I had. "For what?" I asked. "Does it matter?" My brother cut in, smiling. "It's family." My father nodded. "We've got some things to take care of. You're working now. It's time you contributed." I took a breath, slowly. "I don't have that kind of money." The room went still. Even the television seemed to lower itself. My brother tilted his head. "You don't have it. Or you don't want to give it." "I don't have it," I said again. My voice stayed even. "I can barely cover rent and bills. I'm not hiding anything." My father's expression shifted. Not anger, disappointment. Worse. "When I was your age," he said, "I did whatever it took." My brother laughed softly. "If you really cared, you'd find a way." There it was, the trap closing in. "It's Christmas," my father added. "People step up on Christmas." I looked at my hands on the table, clean, empty. I realized then that this conversation hadn't started tonight. It had been waiting for me. "So this is about loyalty now?" I asked. "It's about character," my brother said quickly. "About gratitude." My mother set a dish down too hard. "Enough," she said, barely audible. My father ignored her. "We've done a lot for you," he said. "This is a simple request." Simple. That word did a lot of damage. I understood something in that moment. Any answer I gave would be wrong. If I argued, I was selfish. If I explained, I was making excuses. If I refused, I was ungrateful. So I didn't argue. I said nothing. The silence stretched. My brother watched me like a show he'd already paid for. My father leaned back, studying me as if confirming a suspicion. Finally, he spoke. "I knew you'd let us down." That was when I felt it. The shift. The money had never been the point. Because once my father said those words, my brother finally laughed. It wasn't loud, just a soft chuckle. Like he'd heard the punchline of a joke he already knew. That laugh didn't come from surprise. It came from satisfaction. He didn't need to say anything. That sound was enough to tell me I'd just been judged. And the sentence was final. My father didn't stop him, didn't even glance his way. That was the worst part. I looked at my mother. She stood by the wall, hands folded in front of her apron, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't speak, didn't move. And somehow, her silence filled the room more than anything either of them had said. I waited. I wanted someone to take it back, clarify, maybe say it came out wrong, but nothing came. "You've always been bad luck," my father said next. The words came out smooth, almost gentle, like he was telling me something I should have already known. He wasn't angry. He was certain. That certainty cut deeper than any accusation ever could. "I'm sorry," I said. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining this. He nodded slowly. "It's not just the money. It's everything. Every time something goes wrong in this family, somehow you're around." I blinked. "You think I caused your bad deals? The car breakdown? Uncle Dean's heart attack?" "I'm not saying you did anything on purpose," he said, "but trouble follows you. It always has." He leaned forward slightly, like he was letting me in on a truth he'd been carrying for years. "You bring a weight with you. People feel it." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I couldn't trust my mouth to keep calm. I felt like I'd stepped into a story that had been told behind my back for years, and I was just now catching up. My brother leaned against the armrest, smug. "Honestly, things just go smoother when you're not around." He didn't say it with spite. He said it like he was commenting on the weather, like it was a fact everyone in the room already accepted. And then it hit me. This wasn't a spontaneous attack. This had been rehearsed, agreed upon. The way you all nod when someone says grace before dinner. They'd decided who I was without me. I wasn't a disappointment. I was a scapegoat. That realization burned, but I didn't let it show. My father continued, "You've always been the one we had to fix things around. The missed promotions, the timing, the tension. We tried to help you. God knows we tried." "You didn't help me," I said, voice low. "You don't see it," he replied, shaking his head like I was proving his point. That's when my mother finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and somehow that made it louder than anything else that night. "That's not true." 3 words. That's all she said. But the air snapped, like someone had cracked the seal on a pressurized room. My eyes shot to her. She was looking straight at my father now. And for a moment, the room was completely still. My brother's smile froze. My father's jaw twitched. And then, without a word, he stood. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply walked across the room, lifted his hand, and slapped her. Quick, controlled, like he'd done it before. The sound echoed more than I thought it would. My mother didn't fall, but she swayed. Her hand went to her cheek. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just looked back at him, as if confirming something she'd long suspected. My brother didn't move, didn't blink. He just sat there, satisfied, almost like he'd been waiting for it. I didn't rush to her. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Instead, something inside me turned, like a gear locking into place. I wasn't scared, not anymore. Whatever had once felt like family had snapped, broken so completely that all I could do was watch it settle into its true form. This house ran on silence, on example, and he just made one. When my father turned to me again, he didn't look angry. He looked done, like he was sweeping the last crumb off the table. He pointed to the front door. That was it. No words, no yelling, just a gesture. Final. Cold. My coat was still damp from the walk-in. I grabbed it without thinking. My fingers were stiff, but I didn't rush. No one said a word as I pulled it on, not even my mother. Christmas ended just like that. No goodbyes, no prayers, no second chances. I didn't argue when he pointed to the door, but I wasn't ready for what came next. Because being told to leave was one thing, being erased was another. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The room didn't react. My father stayed by the door. My brother barely glanced my way. It was like they'd already moved on, like I'd been cropped out of the frame before I even left it. The floor creaked under me as I walked across the living room toward the front hallway. I didn't speak. No one tried to stop me. The whole scene felt practiced, as if they'd walked through it in their heads already, rehearsed how they'd play their parts when this night finally came. My mother stood near the coat hooks by the doorway, holding onto the edge of the wall like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on the ground. As I passed, she whispered my name. She didn't say, "Wait," or "Don't go." She just said my name, soft and steady, like she needed to hear it once more before I disappeared from her world. I didn't answer, because if I did, I knew she'd break. And if she broke, I wouldn't leave. And if I didn't leave, I'd never be free of that house. So I kept walking. My father pulled the door open. The cold hit instantly. It rushed in like it had been waiting on the other side to claim me. He didn't look at me, just stared past me, out into the night. "You made your choices," he said, still calm. "Now live with the consequences." There was no weight in his voice, just resolution, like a judge signing off on a sentence. Then he reached behind the door, picked up my coat, the same torn one I'd walked in wearing, and pushed it into my hands. It wasn't a shove, but it wasn't gentle either. It was intentional, enough to let me know I didn't belong anymore. I caught the coat before it hit the floor. Then the door started to swing closed behind me. I turned my head at the last second, just in time to hear the lock click. I stood there on the porch. The wind knifed through the seams of the coat like it wasn't even there. I pulled it tighter, but it didn't help much. My fingers were already starting to go numb. I looked through the living room window. The Christmas lights were still glowing. Blue, red, green. A blinking reminder that inside that house, the show was still going on. Plates clinked, chairs shifted, and then, like someone hit resume on a paused movie, I heard laughter. They'd gone back to dinner. I reached into my pocket, hoping maybe I'd find something I'd forgotten. A few bills, a bus pass, anything. $1. That's all I had. I could have knocked. I could have pounded on the door, demanded to be let back in, but what would I even say? Sorry I didn't have $2,000. Can I have some mashed potatoes? No. That door wasn't going to open again. Not for me. I stepped back, off the porch. The crunch of frozen grass under my boots was the only sound now. I looked around. The street was quiet. Houses lined up like ornaments, each one glowing with warmth that didn't belong to me. And then it hit me. Not like a sudden thought, but like something that had always been true and was just now stepping into the light. This wasn't about tonight. It wasn't about the money, or Christmas, or any one thing I did or didn't do. They'd been waiting for a reason to cut me loose, a story they could agree on to make it feel justified, and tonight gave them that. I wasn't leaving because I failed them. I was leaving because I no longer fit the version of themselves they were trying to protect. I took one last look at the house. I saw my shadow stretch across the sidewalk as another burst of laughter carried out through the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists or whisper promises of revenge. I just turned and walked. Not because I was strong, but because there was nothing left behind me worth turning back for. I walked until the house disappeared, and that's when the night really began. With nowhere to go, every light I passed felt like it belonged to someone else. I didn't have a destination, just a need to move. As long as my feet were moving, I wasn't collapsing. I stayed to the sidewalk, head down, the torn coat barely keeping the wind from cutting through. The silence outside was thick, but inside every house I passed, it was a different world. Curtains were mostly drawn, but I caught glimpses. Kids jumping on couches, someone pouring cider, an older couple sitting side by side, their hands touching without thinking. Some houses echoed with muffled music, others just the clatter of dishes or laughter that sounded so normal it made me ache. No one looked out the window. No one saw me. And honestly, that might have been the worst part. Not being yelled at. Not being judged. Just being nothing at all. I passed one house where they'd strung up lights in the shape of a reindeer and sleigh across the front lawn. The reindeer's head blinked red and white like it was sniffing out joy. I found myself standing there for a second longer than I should have, drawn in by something so simple and stupid. That wasn't my world. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. I kept going, block after block. My fingers were stiff now, stuffed into my pockets with the last bit of warmth I could find. I touched the crumpled bill again. $1. No coins, no card. Just a battered piece of paper that suddenly felt too thin to mean anything. I stopped under a flickering streetlight. My legs were aching, but I didn't sit. Sitting would make it real. I looked up, watched the light struggle to stay alive. That's when I noticed something. Most houses still had their lights on. It was well past midnight by now, yet the warmth inside those homes hadn't dimmed. Porches still glowed. Trees still blinked. Lamps still cast golden halos on faces I couldn't see but could almost feel. It hit me, not with anger, but with a sort of aching clarity. Every single one of those lights was left on for someone. A husband working late. A kid out with friends. A sister flying in on a red-eye. Someone always had a place to come back to. A door that stayed unlocked. A lamp left on by someone who wanted them home safe. No one had left a light on for me. And I realized they never had. The cold came back sharper. I moved again, each step deliberate. My jaw tightened, not from fear, but from control. I wouldn't fall apart here, not on someone else's street, not beneath someone else's tree. Panic didn't help. I knew that. I passed an all-night gas station. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, bright and flat, with no warmth behind them. A guy inside leaned on the counter, scrolling through his phone. Heat radiated from inside. I could walk in, buy a hot drink, maybe even explain things. But I didn't. Not because of pride. I wasn't too proud. I just didn't want to explain myself to a stranger. Didn't want to hear the words come out of my mouth. Didn't want someone to nod too slowly, offer pity wrapped in politeness, and watch me walk back out into the dark. So I kept walking. The streets began to thin. Fewer houses now. The edge of town creeping in. I started thinking about places I could go. Anywhere I wouldn't be seen. Anywhere that didn't come with questions or eyes that measured how far I'd fallen. That's when I remembered the old cabin. It sat just past the tree line behind Miller's Field, the kind of place kids used to dare each other to break into. It had no heat, barely 4 walls, and probably smelled like mildew and mice, but it was empty. And empty was better than rejected. At least the cabin wouldn't ask me why I didn't call ahead. At least it wouldn't measure me against a list of invisible expectations and find me lacking. The wind picked up again, and I shoved my hands deeper into my pockets. My feet knew the way now. Instinct took over. Past the last streetlight, past the edge of yards that had long since been claimed by wild grass and frost. I passed one more lit-up house, a modest place with a chipped fence and a dented mailbox. But still, the porch light burned. Someone inside cared if someone came home tonight. Just not me. I kept going. I didn't know if the cabin was still standing, but it was the only place no one could send me away from. By the time I reached the edge of town, my legs were numb, and my options were gone. The streets had thinned into gravel, then into a narrow dirt path that ducked under bare tree limbs and past a sagging wire fence. The last porch light had faded behind me miles ago, swallowed by frost and fog. What remained ahead wasn't much, just the outline of a cabin leaning slightly to one side like it had given up trying to stand straight a long time ago. The structure looked smaller than I remembered. Then again, most things from childhood do when you return to them older and emptier. Its roof slouched like wet cardboard, and the siding had gone soft with years of damp neglect. One shutter dangled from a single hinge, tapping lightly in the breeze like a nervous finger against glass. There was no welcome mat, no sign of life. But it didn't judge. It didn't care. It just was. I stood in front of the door for a long moment. The wood was swollen from weather, and I had to throw my shoulder against it twice before it groaned open, revealing the cold breath of a space that had forgotten it was ever meant to hold people. Inside, nothing had improved. The air was stale, heavy with mildew and something faintly animal. A single chair, missing one leg, leaned against the wall like it knew better than to try. The floor had patches of dirt where linoleum had peeled away. Holes in the walls let in slivers of moonlight, and somewhere deeper in the shadows, something rustled but didn't show itself. Still, it didn't throw me out. I crossed the creaking floor, brushing cobwebs from the path. I didn't look around too hard. I didn't need to take inventory of what was broken. I only needed a place that wouldn't demand anything from me. That alone made it better than home. I sat down, carefully, cross-legged against the far wall. It was the first time all night that I wasn't moving, wasn't reacting, Wasn't trying to figure out what anyone else needed me to be. I was just a man in a ruined coat, surrounded by silence, finally still. My hands trembled, not from panic, but the kind of deep, exhausting cold that wraps itself around your bones and whispers that it's going to stay. I wrapped the coat tighter, but it didn't do much. My body was still catching up to everything it had lost in the last few hours: heat, dignity, direction. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because crying would have required effort I didn't have. It felt like a job, and I'd already been fired from every job that mattered tonight. Instead, I emptied my pockets, something between habit and ritual. $1, a lint-covered receipt, a crumpled yellow Post-it note I'd forgotten about, my own handwriting on it, a shift change from last week at work. I lined them up on the dusty floor in front of me like artifacts, as if these small, pointless things were all that proved I existed. No photos, no phone calls coming in. Just this collection of leftovers. The receipt caught my eye. The ink was smudged, but the date printed clearly. December 20th. That couldn't be right. I blinked, rubbed my thumb over it. My father had talked tonight like everything had just happened yesterday. About a payment I'd supposedly promised. A date I'd supposedly missed. But if this receipt was from the place he claimed I hadn't shown up to last week, and it was marked paid, then... I frowned, holding it closer to the weak light bleeding in from the holes in the wall. Maybe I had it wrong. Maybe I was too tired to think straight. Still, something was off. I remembered the shift. I remembered delivering the payment, even being surprised by how smooth it went. But tonight, he'd spoken like it never happened. Like I was already guilty and he was just confirming it for the record. Maybe it was a mix-up, maybe not. But something cracked, quietly. Like a hairline fracture in a glass you don't see until it shatters in your hand. It wasn't the lie itself that shook me. It was how easily I'd believed it. I sat back against the wall, told myself it didn't matter, that I was tired, cold, and maybe not thinking clearly, that I should close my eyes just for a while. But the lie echoed, and the echo kept me awake. My mind churned even as my body gave out. Maybe this wasn't just one bad night. Maybe this had been building for years. I folded the receipt carefully, straight lines, sharp corners. Not because I had a plan, not because I needed evidence, but because I didn't want to forget again. Because forgetting is how they get you to accept it. I placed it back in my coat pocket like it mattered. I didn't know what the truth was, but I knew I wasn't done listening. Morning light crept through the cracks in the walls, and with it came a choice. It wasn't much of a sunrise, just a dim, gray wash seeping through the holes in the cabin like a slow leak. But it was enough to wake me. My back ached from the uneven floor, and my fingers felt brittle with cold. For a split second, I didn't remember where I was. Then the smell of mold and wet wood pulled me back fast. The broken chair, the lined-up scraps on the floor, the weight in my chest. I sat up slowly, my body protesting with every move. The coat around me had stiffened overnight, crusted at the edges with frost. I flexed my hands, rubbed them together. Breathing out made fog. That felt like the only magic left in the world. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay still. That's when the thought crept in. Quiet but persistent. I could go back, walk the same path in reverse, apologize, pretend none of it happened, pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. That option stood there like a familiar hallway, lit and warm, with the doorknob right in reach. And for a second, I felt myself lean toward it. But something in me resisted, not out of pride, not out of anger, but something quieter, older. A part of me that had learned what happens when you walk back into a room where your name doesn't mean anything anymore. I reached for my phone, not expecting much, just a habit I couldn't kill. To my surprise, it still had a flicker of life left. 1 bar. Barely enough. The screen lit up. 1 missed call. From my mother. No voicemail. Just the log of the call, sitting there like a weight in the center of my chest. I stared at it longer than I meant to. She had waited until morning. I didn't call back. I told myself it was to save her, that if I called, I'd drag her into the middle of something too jagged to fix. But the truth was more complicated. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, not after what I'd seen, not after what I knew now. I tucked the phone away and stood up. I left the cabin behind for a bit, walking slowly back through the trees until I reached the edge of town. Not all the way in, just enough to catch a signal if I needed it. Just enough to see houses start to wake up. Wreaths still hanging on front doors. Yesterday's celebration still clinging to them like perfume after a long night. I kept my head down. That's when I saw him. I didn't recognize him by name, just a face I'd seen around. A man from town. Maybe he'd worked with my father once. Maybe church. The kind of person who knows everything without ever being told. He didn't smile, didn't ask questions, just stepped toward me like he'd been waiting. From his coat pocket, he pulled out an envelope. It wasn't sealed, just folded. He held it out with 2 fingers. He said 3 words. Keep this quiet. That was it. No explanation, no warning. Just a handoff, like we were part of some deal neither of us agreed to, but both understood. I took it. Watched him walk away without another word. His pace didn't change. He didn't look back. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I'd made it partway back into the woods, where the trees swallowed sound and the air turned colder again, where it felt like I had a little privacy to face whatever was about to hit me. Inside the envelope were papers. Copies, not originals. A few pages, neatly folded. No cover note, just names, dates, numbers, and a signature I recognized immediately, my father's. I scanned just enough to see the shape of it. Financial records, transfers, dates that didn't match the stories I'd been told, claims that couldn't possibly be true unless someone had forged more than just my name. I didn't read it all. I couldn't, not yet. It was too much, not in volume, but in weight. Truth has a different kind of gravity when you weren't expecting it, but I didn't panic, and I didn't crumble. Instead, I folded the papers carefully and tucked them into the inside lining of my coat. A small tear had formed near the pocket seam, just big enough to hide them. I didn't need them to scream. I needed them to wait. I turned around before anyone could see me, made my way back through the trees, down the familiar trail, past the sagging fence, back to the cabin. It didn't ask where I'd been, didn't judge the envelope or the thoughts crawling through my mind. It just stood there, patient, tired, like me. I crossed the threshold again and shut the warped door behind me, sat down on the same spot, closed my eyes. For the first time, I knew the truth, and I knew saying it too soon would ruin everything. While I stayed quiet, they started telling my story for me. The cabin remained still, but the world outside didn't. News moves fast in small towns, faster when someone wants it to. By noon, even the birds sounded different. Sharp, nervous, like they'd heard the rumors too. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left the house. Not a word. Not even a glance at the few cars that passed on the far road beyond the trees. My name hadn't crossed my lips since it left my mother's the night before. But that silence, it had a cost. I chose to stay hidden, hoping the truth would settle before it was twisted. But in my absence, a different truth was crafted. One that didn't need me at all. By mid-afternoon, I crept toward the edge of town again. I kept my hood up, head low, just close enough to hear what I needed. A gas station clerk talking on the phone behind the counter. A woman outside the pharmacy with a cigarette and opinions too loud for the wind to carry away. He walked out. Can you believe that? Christmas Eve. Another voice. He didn't just leave. He demanded money first. Got loud. Scared his own mama. None of it was true. But none of it surprised me either. Each version pulled another thread loose from the truth, until the story barely resembled anything I'd lived through. And every retelling carefully sidestepped one thing: any responsibility from them. It was a rewrite, a public performance, and I wasn't invited. I ducked behind a row of parked cars when I heard my brother's name. Yeah, Daniel said he tried to keep the peace. Poor guy. That one hit different. Always the level-headed one in that family, another voice chimed in. The phrases were well-practiced, polished. He was the calm one, the rational one, the one who tried, which meant I was the opposite, the erratic one, the problem, the man who ruined Christmas. I felt it rise in my throat, rage like pressure under glass, not just at the lies, but at how cleanly they were laid out, how believable. Then came the line that stopped me cold. I heard the police were almost called. Not that I was dangerous, not even that I broke anything, just in case. In case. 2 words that tell a whole story without saying anything. That's when I understood what was happening. This wasn't just gossip. It was groundwork. A story was being built, one where I was unstable, unreliable, maybe even unsafe. And if I said something later, anything, it would already be framed as the ramblings of a bitter man who couldn't handle his own mistakes. I stepped back into the alley behind the diner, hands shaking, not from cold this time, but from restraint. I was this close to stepping out, walking into the middle of Main Street and setting the record straight. But I didn't. Because I knew what would happen. I'd give them what they wanted, a burst of emotion, a confirmation of the version they'd written. No, not yet. Instead, I pulled out the envelope again, sat on a curb, the world moving around me like I wasn't even there, and flipped through the contents one more time. Financial records, inconsistencies, proof that dates had been changed, that things were moved around in my name without my knowledge, my father's signature on lines he'd never mentioned, and the receipt, the one they thought I'd throw away. None of it meant anything to anyone else yet, but to me, it was enough. I folded them again, carefully, deliberately, and tucked them back into my coat. They thought they were getting ahead of the truth, but every word they spoke without me made the real story stronger. They were afraid, not of me breaking in or lashing out, but of me staying silent, because silence makes people bold, and bold people make mistakes. So I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was finally learning when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. They thought they had buried me, but they'd just given me proof. The day they tried to finish me was the day I stopped waiting. It started with a thin envelope delivered to the cabin. No stamp, no return address, just tucked between the slats of the old door like an afterthought, or a warning. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what was inside. By then, it had been 2 days since Christmas. The cold had dulled into something familiar, but not kind. I could feel it in my knees every time I moved, like the floor of that cabin had worn itself into my bones. I'd spent the morning boiling water over a tin of sterno just to warm my hands. Not cooking, just surviving. When I finally opened the envelope, I sat down before I finished reading. A formal complaint. Not criminal. Cleverer than that. A concern filed through the county. Erratic behavior. Unstable conduct. Welfare risk. Worded like worry, but aimed like a dagger. Carefully constructed to make me seem like a problem, a risk, a liability, and buried in the language, plain as day, was what they really wanted. A paper trail. The handwriting wasn't typed, it was filled in. Box after box. Neat. Familiar. My brother's script. But nowhere was his name. Just references. Hints. Enough to connect dots if you knew where to look, but not enough to accuse. I stared at that form so long, the sun shifted in the sky. Anger came fast, and just as fast, I put it down. I didn't tear the paper, didn't throw it, just folded it once and slid it into my coat pocket with the others. They wanted me to rush, react, rage. But this time, I wouldn't give them that. I didn't call anyone, didn't text. I didn't even breathe heavy. Instead, I cleaned myself up, washed my face with melted snow, trimmed my beard using a dull, disposable razor I found in my pack, changed into the one shirt that didn't smell like smoke and regret. Then I packed a folder. Nothing flashy, just the truth in paper form. The envelope with the documents, the receipt, the records that didn't add up, and the timeline they never thought I'd bother to build. By late morning, I walked into the county administrative building like I had a right to be there. Because I did. I didn't march or make a scene. I didn't ask for anyone by name. I just waited for the woman behind the glass to look up and ask how she could help me. Then I asked for a private meeting to submit documentation in response to a filed report. The clerk looked surprised, not defensive, not rude. Just surprised that someone like me, coat torn, eyes tired, posture straight, had come in with paperwork instead of a problem. 15 minutes later, I was in a quiet room with one fluorescent light and 2 plastic chairs. I placed the folder on the table and said 6 words. These papers will speak for themselves. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I let the documents do what words couldn't. The receipts, the signatures, the mismatched dates, the financial records that proved stories had been rearranged to hide transactions in my name. At the end of the folder, I placed the complaint form I'd received, side by side with a sample of my brother's handwriting. And then I stopped talking. It took a while. The man on the other side of the desk read slowly. Double-checked things, took notes. I watched his face, and I saw it. The moment something didn't line up. His jaw didn't tighten, but his pen stopped moving, then started again. Faster. His questions weren't for me. He was forming questions for someone else. The kind of questions people don't expect when they think they've gotten away with something. He asked me one thing. Have you spoken to them about this yet? No, I said. I wanted the facts in place first. He nodded, quiet. The shift had begun. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I didn't play victim. I gave him nothing but facts. And that's what made the room feel heavier with each passing second. Facts are stubborn. They don't blink. At some point, I leaned back in the chair and realized my coat, my old, beat-up, soot-stained coat, was still folded over the back of the seat. The same one I wore the night they told me to leave. Nobody commented on it, but it hung there like a shadow in the room. A reminder. They had written me off, and I was still standing. When the meeting ended, no one said, "You were right." No one said, "We'll take care of it." But they didn't have to. The silence said enough. The kind of silence that comes when the script changes mid-performance. I stood up first. I didn't linger. I didn't ask when I'd hear back or what would happen next. I'd done what I came to do. Let the truth do the rest. Out in the hallway, I paused before reaching the front door. I could hear voices in the distance, muffled but tense. Familiar ones, my brother's maybe, my father's possibly. It didn't matter, because by then I was already walking away. I didn't hear them beg until I was halfway out the door. They said my name like it could still stop me. I was already halfway to the sidewalk, steps measured, breath steady, when I heard my father's voice behind me, cracked, desperate, almost unfamiliar. "Son, wait." It didn't stop me. Then came another voice. My brother. His tone had changed too. No longer that calm, calculated veneer he wore so well. This one was rushed, panicked. "Just talk to us for a second." I kept walking. The air outside the county building was colder than I remembered, though the sun was still up. Winter light, the kind that fades faster than it arrives. The kind that doesn't warm anything, just watches you leave. Footsteps followed. I heard them coming closer, crunching on old gravel that led to the street. Then came the sound that would have shattered me once, but not today. A knee hit pavement. I didn't turn around, but I didn't need to. I could feel it. That shift. Not repentance, not love, control, theatrics. It wasn't about making it right. It was about reclaiming the narrative. I paused at the edge of the sidewalk, not because I was moved, but because I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. The same men who once made me question my own sanity, now scrambling to hold on to an image of themselves that was slipping fast. I didn't speak. Not to them. Not about the past. Not about that Christmas dinner. Not about the slap, the accusations, the way they painted me unstable to protect themselves. Words, at that point, were useless. I'd already given them too many chances to understand, and too much silence to hear their own guilt echo back. Instead, I said one thing. This ends here. No threats, no demands, no sermons, just a boundary, drawn clearly for the first and final time. I walked, not fast, not angry, just forward. They didn't follow. The further I got, the lighter I felt. Not in some poetic, floating way. No redemption music playing in my head. It was more like the weight I'd carried for years had finally decided it didn't belong to me. By the time I made it back to the edge of town, the sky had shifted into that soft winter dusk. Gray, quiet, familiar. I stopped at the gas station 2 blocks from the cabin and grabbed a coffee. Black, lukewarm, still better than anything I'd had in days. Paid in exact change, the cashier barely looked at me. That was fine. Normal felt good. From there, the walk back to the cabin was slower. Not from fatigue this time, but because I wasn't rushing from anything, or toward anything. The cabin hadn't changed. It still looked like it might fall in on itself with one strong wind. The sagging roof hadn't gotten any straighter. The cold was still waiting inside, just as sharp, just as honest. But I walked through the door standing taller than when I left. I didn't toss my coat to the floor like I had before. I hung it carefully on the crooked nail near the door. A gesture that Didn't seem like much, but to me, it meant I wasn't hiding anymore. The envelope I had carried for days went into the drawer, not discarded, just put away where it would stay dry, safe. The truth didn't need to be waved around anymore. It had already done what it needed to do. Then I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the dollar bill, still folded, still soft from the moisture in that drafty cabin. I laid it flat on the table, smoothing the edges. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. That single dollar was a reminder of everything I endured. What I survived with when no one thought I could, when they expected me to crawl back, when they thought they'd left me with nothing. I sat across from it like it was an old photograph, one I didn't need to frame or explain. It just belonged. Later, as the evening settled in and the wind began to hum through the cracks in the wood, I started to think about what came next. Not big plans, no grand declarations, just small ones. A job, something manual, something quiet. There was a construction yard south of town, always putting up signs for seasonal labor. I could check in there tomorrow, ask questions, fill out paperwork. Then maybe, somewhere further out, an apartment. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls that were mine, a door I could lock, a window with light. I'd thought once that I needed closure with them, a reconciliation, something dramatic and clean. But I didn't. Not anymore. What I needed was my own space to exist, and for the first time, I didn't need their permission to have it. Night came slowly. I lit one of the old candles I'd found in the corner days earlier. Its flame was soft. It flickered, but held. As I sat there, I realized something. The wound wasn't gone. It probably never would be. Some losses leave marks that don't ask for healing. They just ask to be acknowledged. But that wound no longer dictated my pace, my path, my worth. And that was enough. Outside, a branch snapped in the wind. I didn't flinch. I was here, not waiting, not begging, not explaining, just here. Some families teach you who you are by refusing to see you, and sometimes walking away is how you finally do.